Hi, I'm Maeve. My parents rewrote their will, gave everything to my sister, a woman who once stole my rent money to buy pills. When I asked why, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Because she needs it more than you ever will." So I stopped sending money. I cut all ties. A month later, the phone rang. They weren't calling to apologize. They were begging for help. But after everything, I had one question on my mind. Would you have picked up? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where are you from? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. The chairs in the attorney's office weren't meant for comfort, just control. Hard-backed, beige, clinical. I sat in one of them, palms sweating against my skirt, while across from me, Brandy twirled a chewed-up pen cap between her fingers like this was a dentist appointment, not the reading of our parents' will. She hadn't even tried to dress decently. Jeans, flip-flops, oversized sunglasses perched on her head like she was on break from some beach town detox center. Our parents flanked her like she was the guest of honor. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they'd gone colorless, and Dad, well, he stared at the floor like he always did when things got real. I glanced toward the attorney, Mr. Preston, some old colleague of Dad's from the insurance days. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His fingers hovered over a stack of cream-colored papers. Then he cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, voice even, eyes down. I braced myself. After everything, every late-night wire transfer, every box of groceries I dropped at their doorstep when Brandy was in rehab again, I thought maybe, just maybe, there'd be some acknowledgement, a gesture of fairness. "To Brandy Elaine Hartley," Mr. Preston read, "we bequeath the family residence located at 223 Brookridge Lane, all savings held at First Bank of Illinois, and all possessions and heirlooms currently located within said property." My ears rang. I sat still. Maybe I misheard. He continued, "This includes the pension payout from Mr. Hartley's former employer, as well as the rights to the Hartley Antique Collection." "Wait," I said quietly, not to interrupt but to breathe. "Everything?" He paused, then nodded, kindly. "Yes, Maeve. That's what the document stipulates." I looked at my mother. Her face was stone. "Because she needs it more than you ever will," she said, without flinching. "You're already fine. That's all. Not thank you for covering Brandy's bail in Albuquerque. Not thank you for keeping Dad on my health insurance through the pandemic. Not even a nod to the fact that I paid off their reverse mortgage 3 years ago so they wouldn't lose the house. You're already fine." The words lodged in my throat like dry bread. My pulse throbbed behind my eyes. I didn't speak, didn't ask for an explanation. What would be the point? They'd already decided who mattered. Brandy looked down at her lap, avoiding my eyes. Guilt wasn't her thing. She preferred denial dressed up as sass. I sat back. For a second, I felt like a little girl again, back in our living room, clutching a spelling bee trophy while they applauded Brandy for just showing up to family dinner sober. Only now, the stakes were real, final, legal. I stood, calmly, no dramatic chair scraping, just one breath, steady and full. "You made your choice," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out the spare key to the house, still attached to the worn leather keychain Dad gave me when I moved to Chicago at 23. I laid it gently on the polished table. No one moved. Not Mom, not Brandy, not even Dad. I turned and walked out. Outside, the summer air hit my skin like steam from a kettle. It was the kind of heat that made you question if your breath belonged to you. I walked to my car, every step quiet, deliberate, and slid into the driver's seat. I stared at the dashboard, my hands resting at 10 and 2, not even turning the ignition. They'd taken everything, not the house, not the money. They took my place, not in the will, but in their hearts. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Mom. Then again. Brandy. I didn't pick up. I wouldn't. Instead, I opened the glove compartment and pulled out something I hadn't touched in years. A hand-stitched handkerchief, pale beige, faded embroidery, my name on one corner, sewn in wobbly stitches, a gift from Mom when I was 8. I'd scraped my knees on the playground, and she'd wrapped the little square around my hand, kissed my forehead, and said, "Always keep something soft nearby." I looked at it now, draped across my lap. It felt like something from another universe. A kindness I'd imagined. A mother who no longer existed. The sun began to set, golden light pouring through the windshield. The silence in my car was different than the one in that office. This silence had strength. The next morning, before I even got out of bed, I opened the banking app on my phone. Under recurring transfers, I hit pause on every monthly deposit. Groceries, utilities, Brandy's car insurance. For the first time in 15 years, I sent them nothing. The next morning, after I froze the accounts, the quiet in my house was unnatural. No notifications, no banking alerts, no late-night just-checking-in texts from my mother disguised as guilt trips. I made coffee, black, and stared out the kitchen window at my modest backyard, listening to the hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of the neighbor's golden retriever. It was the kind of morning I used to hope for. Quiet, uneventful, mine. Then the phone rang. The name on the screen stopped my breath. Mom? For a few seconds, I just watched it buzz. I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity has a voice too. Quiet, but persistent. So I picked up. "Maeve," she said. Her voice was shaky, the kind of shake that comes from panic, not age. "Maeve, we need you." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence fill the line, let it press against her ribs. Then I asked flatly, "What happened?" She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "It's Brandy. She crashed your father's car last night. He's in the hospital. She was using again. She took the car. We didn't know." I closed my eyes, leaned against the counter. Was the car insured? There was a long pause. She let it lapse. Of course she did. I spoke without venom. It was just a fact. Like gravity. Like every warning I'd ever given them floating back to the surface. "She listed you as the co-signer on the credit line for the repairs," Mom added, voice lowering, like that would make it better. "We had to. They wouldn't approve it otherwise." I stood up straight. "I never signed anything." "We may have added your name. It was years ago. You were busy, you were traveling so much then, and so you forged my signature?" The silence this time wasn't hesitation. It was guilt, thick and sour. I could hear her swallow. "I'm on my way," I said. Then I hung up. It took me just under an hour to get to the hospital. I parked at the far end of the lot, sat in the car for a moment, then pulled the visor down and looked at myself in the mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes heavy with disappointment. I didn't fix anything, just stared for a second longer than I needed, then got out. Inside, the fluorescent lights hit me like a slap, too bright, too harsh for a morning like this. A nurse looked up from the reception desk and immediately recognized me. "You're here for Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. I nodded. "He's in 304, minor chest episode. He's stable now. Your mother and sister are already in there." She smiled, then added, "You're the responsible daughter, right? He was asking for you." I forced a polite smile and walked past her without saying a word. When I stepped into the room, Dad looked pale but alive, tubes in his arm and a dull beeping beside him. Brandy was sitting in the corner chair, her left arm in a makeshift sling, one cheek bruised purple. Mom sat beside the bed, stroking his hand like a priest at a deathbed. "Maeve," Dad croaked, "you didn't have to come." "I know." Mom stood. "She didn't mean it. She's just not herself when it gets bad. You know how it is." I didn't answer. I was looking at Brandy, who had lifted her phone under the blanket, thumb moving fast. She looked up, fake tears hanging at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." I glanced down. She was slipping a packet of gauze and 2 bottles of antiseptic into her tote bag. I said nothing. "Maeve?" Brandy tilted her head. "Aren't you gonna say anything?" I walked out. The vending machines were at the end of the hall. I stood in front of the row of snacks, eyes locked on a bag of peanut clusters. Dad used to buy them for me every Sunday when we went to the hardware store together. He always handed them to me before we got back in the car, saying, "Don't tell your mom." I pressed the buttons, but the machine jammed. I stared at the bag stuck behind the glass, then pressed the refund button. Nothing. I walked away. Back in the car, I sat in silence. Then I called Liana, an old college friend now working corporate law in Chicago. "Can I get your help?" I asked. "Always. What's going on?" "My family may have tied me to a forged credit line. I need to untangle myself, fast. And I want every document with my name reviewed, especially anything signed in the past 10 years. She paused. "That's heavy. I'll start digging." "Thanks, Liana." 3 days later, Liana called back. She sounded too calm, the kind of calm that meant something wasn't. "I found something." "Tell me." "There's a sealed trust. Filed by your father 5 years ago. It's labeled 4MW, contingent upon event of irrevocable separation. It was locked under legal guardianship. You were never meant to find out unless something drastic happened." "Like cutting ties?" "Exactly." I rubbed my temples. "What's in it?" "I can't say yet, but it's not small." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "Maeve?" she asked. "You okay?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Thanks for the heads up." Later that evening, I drove back to the hospital. I didn't even know why. Maybe for closure, maybe for answers. It was raining by the time I pulled into the lot. I sat with the engine off, watching the water bead and run down the windshield. When I finally walked through the lobby, my shoes squeaked on the tile. I turned down the corridor toward the elevators when I heard the familiar voice behind me. "Maeve!" I stopped. My mother rushed out of the waiting area, umbrella dripping, eyes wild. "You can't keep doing this, showing up when you feel like it and walking away when it suits you." I turned quietly. "Mom, I didn't ask to be any part of this." She stepped closer. "If you walk away again, don't bother coming back. Ever." I didn't flinch. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "I wasn't planning to." Then I turned and walked out, the hallway lights flickering behind me like the last crackles of a dying fire. I didn't turn back. Her voice cracked behind me in that parking lot, sharp, desperate, but I kept walking. My keys were already in hand before the last word even hit the air. And still, it lingered. "Don't bother coming back." Back in my condo, I kicked off my shoes, tossed my coat over the arm of the couch, and stood in the middle of the living room. The silence wasn't comforting this time. It was thick, like the echo of her voice had followed me all the way from the hospital, slipped through the elevator doors, and now sat smug in my kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. Didn't drink it, just stared at it like it might say something different, something softer. Instead, her words kept ringing in my head. "Don't bother coming back." Truth is, she'd been saying that my entire life. Not with words, but in the way she gave Brandy the last scoop of ice cream, even when I asked first, in how she brushed off my graduation because Brandy was going through a hard time again, in how every photo frame in their hallway skipped over my face like I was just a ghost that had wandered through. I opened the top drawer of the hallway desk, the one I rarely touched. There it was, the last birthday card they ever sent me, a blank hallmark, no message, just "Love, Mom and Dad," scribbled like an afterthought, not even signed in their own handwriting, looked like Brandy had done it for them. I dropped it into the trash. That's when my phone buzzed. Seth. I hadn't told him much about what happened, just that things were escalating. His text was short, direct. "Seth, need to see you. Office. Now." 15 minutes later, I was back on Lakeshore, parking outside his building. He buzzed me in before I even knocked. Inside, he already had a manila folder laid out on the table. "You look like you haven't slept," he said gently, but his eyes were all business. "I haven't," I replied. "Let's skip the pleasantries." Seth flipped the folder open and slid the first page toward me. "This came in last night. Scanned from an estate planning archive your father's financial advisor forwarded. You're going to want to sit." I did. At the top of the document, "Quiet Trust Agreement, Maeve L. Green, dated 6 years ago." I blinked. "What? Is this? It's a trust. Your father set it up in your name. Quiet, meaning no public filing until activation. It includes partial ownership of a commercial property in Naperville, and some very old stock options in a now-defunct tech firm that recently got acquired. A small windfall, but still something. I read down the page. My heart was racing, but my hands stayed steady. Why wasn't this ever activated? That's the thing. Seth's face darkened. It should have been. The trust's terms matured 2 years ago, but right before that, something changed. He pulled out a second document. It looked newer. Same trust name, same line for my signature, but this one had a box checked. Waiver of beneficiary rights. Signed, Maeve L. Green. I stared at it. My chest tightened. That's not my signature, I said immediately. That's not even close. I know, he said. I compared it to your mortgage paperwork from last year. The strokes are completely different. Also, look at the notary. I scanned the corner. Notarized by Michelle B., State of Illinois. Seth raised an eyebrow. Brandy's friend from high school. She tagged her in a photo last year from a birthday brunch. That cold, familiar mix of betrayal and numbness settled into my bones. Again, she forged my name. Not just forged, Seth said. Weaponized it. This waiver voided your rights to the trust, just months before the new version of your dad's will was drafted. This wasn't favoritism, Maeve. It was a plan. I leaned back in the chair, trying to breathe through the sudden heat behind my eyes. 6 years ago, my dad set aside something for me, quietly. And then, quietly again, they erased it, used my name, my silence, my absence. A thought crept in like a shadow. They didn't just forget me, they removed me. I looked back down at the forged signature. The loops were too round, the slant too smooth. I've never written my G like that in my life. That's when the memory came. I was 17, accepted to NYU on a partial scholarship. I had my bags packed. I was ready. And then, the night before orientation, Dad sat me down in the kitchen. Brandy had relapsed. Again. She needs you here, he said. You're strong. She isn't. Mom nodded silently, her lips tight, like she didn't quite agree but wouldn't dare say it. I stayed. I gave up my place, took night classes locally, picked up shifts at the diner while Brandy worked on herself. That night came back like a knife. I was never the fragile one. So they felt entitled to break me. Back in Seth's office, I barely noticed he'd stepped away to take a call. I was still staring at the document when my phone buzzed again. New voicemail, Aunt Cora. I hesitated, then hit play. Sweetheart, her voice was soft, careful. I don't know what they've told you, but your father wasn't always like this, and I kept something. Something you should have had long ago. If you're ready, come see me. I pressed the phone to my chest. Aunt Cora, my dad's sister, the only person who ever looked me in the eye and saw me, not the version Mom painted, not the burden, just me. I stood, collected the paperwork, and walked out into the hallway. Outside, the sky had turned that tired gray Chicago wears most of the year. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. I drove home slow, didn't put on music, just let the sound of traffic wash over me, grounding me. Back in my apartment, I laid the trust papers on the counter, my eyes locked onto the signature again. A tremor of something stirred in my chest. Not grief, not hurt, resolve. They used my name like it belonged to them, but I was done being their ghost. I picked up the document, ran my fingers along the fake signature, and whispered, "You wanted war? You just got it." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, because I was wide awake with clarity. At sunrise, I stood by my kitchen counter, watching the coffee drip. The forged signature was still spread out on the table, next to my phone, my keys, and a train ticket I'd just booked at 4:23 a.m. I hadn't been to Aunt Cora's in almost 2 decades, but when someone tells you there are truths in this house your mother didn't want you to see, you show up, no matter how far, no matter what it costs. It was a long ride north, out of the concrete bones of Chicago, into the trees and breath and hush of Wisconsin. The further we went, the quieter my thoughts became. until all that was left was a strange stillness. I stepped off the platform in a lakeside town that didn't even have a proper sign, just a hand-painted board that read, "Welcome home, if you mean it." Cora picked me up in an old truck that smelled like cedar, dust, and cinnamon. "You're thinner than I like," she said by way of hello, "but your eyes look like your father's used to, before everything." The road twisted into forest, and then, like an old memory climbing up from the basement, her cabin appeared. It wasn't glamorous, but it was true. That kind of place where nothing was fake. The porch sagged a little, the paint had surrendered to time, but the windows still glowed like someone had been expecting you for years. Inside, I was surrounded by something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. There were pictures, actual pictures, of me as a child, me holding a fishing pole with my dad, me in a sunflower dress next to Cora at the state fair. Photos I hadn't even known existed. She handed me tea without asking how I took it. Then she said, "They buried a lot of things, Maeve, but not everything stayed dead." Later that evening, after I'd unpacked and we'd eaten, Cora opened the attic door. "Come on," she said, flicking on a flashlight. "It's time." The attic smelled like cedar shavings and old summer sweat. In the far corner, beneath a stack of faded Afghans, was a wooden chest with iron corners. Cora knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the lid like it was a wound. "He mailed them all here," she murmured. "I didn't open a single one unless he told me to." I opened the lid. Letters, dozens, bundled by twine, all from my father. I read the first one, then another, then another. "I wish I had spoken up, but your mother, she thinks silence is cleaner. Brandy's not well, but Maeve pays for it every time. If I die before I fix this, I hope she finds these. I hope you show her." The one that gutted me the most simply said, "Don't tell Maeve unless something goes terribly wrong." I sat there holding my breath while my whole childhood unraveled in my hands. He had tried. Weakly, quietly, but he had tried. We stayed in silence until the sun dipped behind the trees and the attic turned amber. Then Cora stood and said, "There's more. Come." Downstairs in the living room, she reached behind an old bookshelf and lifted the edge of a loose floorboard. "You ever wonder why I never moved out of this cabin?" She pulled up the board. Underneath was a small gray safe. "Your father left it here in 2018, she said. "Told me to open it only if the family turned on you completely. I think we're well past that line, don't you?" I nodded. My fingers were cold. The safe clicked open. Inside was a plastic bag, and inside the bag, history. My original NYU scholarship letter, the one my father made me give up when Brandy needed me home. A folder of estate documents, unsigned, unedited, unmanipulated. One with the quiet trust deed in my name, dated long before Brandy's power grab. My name, in his handwriting, not forged, not buried. And one last thing, an old cassette tape. Cora looked at it, then handed it to me. He made it in 2017, said he didn't trust writing anymore. I didn't have a player, but I knew I'd find one. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why didn't he do more?" Cora sat down beside me. "Because your father was a man who wanted peace more than truth, and your mother, she knew it." She left the room quietly. I stared at everything on the table. My old dreams. My name in ink, untouched. A trust I was meant to receive. The proof. They erased me on paper. But I was still here. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I stood up, took my phone out, and began taking photos, one document at a time. I labeled each file carefully, made a digital copy, then another. Then I packed it all into my bag like ammunition. It was no longer about money, or trust, or inheritance. It was about memory, and erasure, and the quiet war they'd waged while smiling in every Christmas card. I heard Cora shuffle back in, her slippers brushing the wood. She handed me a legal envelope. Old, faded, sealed. Her hand didn't tremble. "This," she said. This changes everything. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, not just because of the contents, but because of what it meant. I didn't open it that night. I didn't have to. The way Aunt Cora looked at me after placing it in my hand said enough. Get ready. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the Dane County Courthouse. There was a quiet buzz in the air, cars pulling in and out of the lot, pigeons fluttering overhead, and the heavy clack of someone's heels echoing across the sidewalk. I stood still, folder clutched tightly to my chest. I wasn't shaking, not anymore. There was no space for fear, only resolve. I took a breath, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped inside. The air inside was cool, the kind that carries whispers and old secrets in the vents. The clerk behind the glass didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes flicked from my face to the folder I was gripping like a lifeline. "I'd like to file a petition," I said. My voice was steady, cold, controlled. "Probate?" she asked, sliding a form toward me. "Yes. Contesting a will." She nodded and leaned forward slightly. "Supporting evidence?" I placed each item on the counter like cards in a game I intended to win: the original trust, the audio cassette in a labeled bag, the signed affidavit from Cora, the analysis comparing my father's signature from the forged document to verified samples. She examined them, eyes narrowing as she flipped through the packet. "If this holds up," she murmured, more to herself than to me, "it'll blow a hole right through their little scheme." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. While she processed the filing, I moved to the waiting area to get a few forms notarized. The wooden benches were stiff, and the air smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon disinfectant. I found myself behind an older man in line, probably mid-70s, in a well-pressed blazer and thick glasses. After a minute, he turned and looked at me. His gaze lingered longer than casual politeness allowed. "You're Margaret Maeve Harlowe's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. My spine stiffened. "I am." He nodded slowly. "Thought so. You've got your father's mouth. Determined, not always wise, but never quiet." I blinked, caught off guard. He extended his hand. "Stanley Richter. Retired now, but I was your father's estate attorney back when he still had teeth in a fight." I shook his hand, a little warily. "I warned him," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Told him not to let Brandy bully him into changing that will. Told him it'd eat him up." I searched his face. He looked tired, not weak, just disappointed by life. "He cried in my office, you know. Grown man, crying. First time I ever saw that. Said he was doing what he had to do to keep peace in the house. That he couldn't bear to lose both you and her. I told him peace bought with injustice wasn't peace. It was surrender." A beat passed. I swallowed hard. "Would you be willing to testify?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time, then gave a soft, weathered chuckle. "You bring this thing to court and I'll walk through fire to sit in that chair?" I thanked him. We exchanged contact info, and he patted my shoulder gently before walking off down the corridor. Back at the filing desk, the clerk handed me a small packet with instructions. "It's official now. They'll be notified within 2 days." On my way out, I stopped at a mailbox in the lobby. I slipped an envelope into the slot. Certified mail. The cease and desist to Brandy's lawyer. Inside were copies of every damning piece of evidence. The letter had one line under my signature. "What you erased, I kept. No rage, no threats, just fact." I stepped out into the early afternoon sun and inhaled deep. Something about the light felt different, clearer. That night, while I was sipping coffee in Cora's tiny kitchen, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. "Brandy." I didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me, so I hit play. "Maeve, just call us, please. I think Mom's having a breakdown. She's not eating, she keeps asking about you. I don't even know what's real anymore. Please just talk to me." I deleted it. The silence after was almost warm. Later, I took a quiet drive back into town. There was one last stop I needed to make before the day ended. At the bank, the manager, an older woman with kind eyes, escorted me into the vault area and pulled my box from the steel drawer. The key clicked. The lid lifted. Inside sat my old checkbook. The same one I used to send monthly payments to my parents after Dad got sick. Rent, groceries, hospital bills, even that cruise Mom insisted was for her nerves. I ran my fingers over the worn leather for a second before slipping it into my purse. When I got home, I plugged in the shredder and watched the checkbook disappear in slow, humming slices. They always said I was too quiet, too soft. This time, I thought, they'll learn what silence really feels like. The next morning, I returned to the courthouse for one final signature. The same clerk looked up as I stepped forward. She scanned the last page of the petition, then nodded, stamping it with finality. "Next step," she said, handing it back. "They're getting served." Near. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the late autumn wind caught my coat and tugged at the legal envelope in my hand. I held it tighter, feeling the weight of the stamped petition settle into my chest like a quiet drumbeat. The fight had officially begun. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat by the window of my apartment, watching lights flicker across neighboring buildings, the city slowly dimming into silence. In the background, the dishwasher hummed and clicked, but my thoughts were louder. I reviewed every word I'd prepared, every document filed. I knew they'd come back swinging. I just didn't expect it so early. By the time the gray morning light pushed through the blinds, my phone lit up on the counter. The name on the screen made my stomach stiffen. "Mom?" I answered, slow and flat. Maeve speaking. There was no pause, no greeting. "You want war? You'll get it," she snapped, her voice sharp and unfiltered. "You're not family anymore. You made your choice." I didn't flinch. Did I? Then, like clockwork, Brandy's voice barged in from the background, shrill and furious. "You were supposed to be the quiet one, the spinster aunt who mails checks and stays out of the way, not this, not whatever the hell this is." And just like that, the line that held their masks cracked. I leaned against the fridge, letting them keep talking, their anger unraveling like a threadbare rug. "If your father hadn't been so weak," my mother hissed suddenly, "none of this would be happening." There it was, the slip, the truth peeking through anger. I didn't say a word. I just hung up, calm as glass. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was the kind of quiet certainty that settles into your bones when you finally stop asking for permission to exist. I showered, dressed, and called Stanley. 40 minutes later, we were sitting across from a seasoned probate attorney in a modest office on East Washington Ave. Her name was Deborah Green. Graying hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose, but her mind sharp as ever. After listening carefully, Deborah leaned back and tapped her pen against the edge of her yellow pad. "Maeve," she said, "this isn't just a matter of a contested will. If your father was in cognitive decline and was coerced into signing that revision, it falls into undue influence territory, especially if we can prove he had doubts." I nodded once. "He did." Stanley added, "Her father came to me before the changes were filed, said he was being pushed, that he didn't want to go through with it." Deborah's eyes sharpened. "Did he use the word pressure?" Stanley gave a small nod. "He said they were wearing him down, that he just wanted peace." We stayed another hour. We outlined the plan for deposition, reviewed the timelines, and began prepping exhibits. It was methodical, almost surgical, but something in me was still burning. When I got home, I sat down at my dining table, laptop open, folders spread out. I reached for the external hard drive my father had given me the year before he passed. It had lived in my safe deposit box, untouched until now. Inside it, I found what I remembered, and one thing I had nearly forgotten: a video file, time-stamped a few weeks before the revised will. I clicked play. There he was, my father, sitting in his old study, same navy sweater, same look in his eyes when he was thinking carefully before speaking. "Maeve," he began, "if you're watching this, then I guess I didn't manage to say it in time, or maybe I got talked out of it. Either way, I just want to be clear. I never wanted to change the trust. I've been feeling cornered lately. They, your mother and Brandy, They mean well, but they're relentless. I wanted you to have your part. You earned it. Don't let anyone take that from you, kiddo." He paused then, looked down, then straight back into the lens. "Don't let them take everything you are just to keep the peace." The screen went black. My throat tightened. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I uploaded the video to Dropbox. I copied the link into an email and typed just one sentence. "Since you erased my name, I figured I'd bring his voice back instead." No signature, no threat, just the truth, and the sound of my father reclaiming himself. I hit send. That evening, I pulled out the old checkbook, the one I'd used for years to send my parents their monthly allowance. It was tucked inside a fireproof lockbox, behind documents and a few faded birthday cards. I flipped through it one last time. Every check, every note, for the house, for Mom's meds, for the new roof. All quiet proof of care they never returned. I placed the checkbook into my shredder. Let the pages disappear line by line. This time, they'll learn what silence really feels like. Later that night, as the apartment settled into calm, a new email slid into my inbox. Subject: regarding Brandy Body. "You don't know me, but I'm Brandy's fiancé. I think we should talk before the wedding." I stared at the screen, frozen. The cursor hovered over reply. Was this an ambush or an unexpected ally? I clicked the email closed but didn't move. The cursor still blinked on my screen like it was waiting to finish the sentence for me. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling for a moment, then pulled out my phone. The message from Jude was still there. Simple, strange. "You don't know me, but I'm Brandy's fiancé. I think we should talk before the wedding." I wasn't in the business of trusting anyone too quickly these days, but something in the way he phrased it, hesitant, deliberate, didn't feel like bait. It felt like someone carefully stepping across a minefield. So I replied. An hour later, we agreed on a public cafe in Milwaukee, midday. Neutral ground, neutral hour. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want opinions, just the truth. The next day, I drove myself, parked 2 blocks away, and walked the rest. The breeze off Lake Michigan still carried a bite, even in spring. My boots clicked against the sidewalk as I rounded the corner. He was already there. Dark jacket, clean shave. The kind of man Brandy would have called safe and shapeless, back when she still talked to me like a sister. He stood when I approached. "You're Maeve?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. I nodded and sat across from him. "You're Jude." He let out a small, nervous laugh. "This feels weird." I didn't blink. "Then let's skip past the weird part." He nodded, glanced around, and leaned in slightly. "Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Your sister lied to me." I waited. I'd been lied to in so many ways this past year, I didn't even flinch. "She told me you were a distant cousin," he said. "One who'd, her words, run off with a married professor and ruined his family. She said you'd caused so much embarrassment they had to cut you off." I took a slow sip of my coffee. She's always had a flair for fiction. "I believed her," he added, his voice tight. I didn't know anything back then, but I do now. I dug. "Why now?" I asked. "Why reach out to me?" He swallowed. "Because I'm not in this engagement willingly. Not really." That got my attention. He looked down at his hands. "I own a design consultancy. Small, but my father set up a trust when I turned 30. Brandy found out. Then she and your mom found ways to make me feel like I didn't have much of a choice." "What kind of ways?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I recorded this 2 weeks ago. They didn't know." He tapped the screen, and the audio began to play. "Dan," Brandy's voice came through, sharp and certain. "If I marry him, I get access to the inheritance clause. He doesn't even know yet, but Mom says the prenup won't hold up under what she calls emotional manipulation. She has connections. We'll be fine." My stomach turned, but I stayed still. Another voice, my mother's, cut in. "Just keep him focused on the wedding. Once your name's on the account, no one can take it from you." Then silence. Jude locked the phone and looked up at me. "I'm not proud of waiting this long," he said quietly, "but I'm tired of being used." I let the air settle for a moment. "Why tell me?" "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life building a marriage on lies. And maybe I want to help undo some of the damage." I stared at him for a long time. "You understand what you're stepping into?" He nodded. "Then here's my boundary," I said. "You don't get to feel better just because you finally stood up. If you're in, you're in. No second-guessing, no disappearing halfway." "I understand." I leaned back. "Good, because I'm prepping a civil claim against both of them." His eyebrows lifted. "You are?" "Oh, I am. And your recording? Might be Exhibit B?" We sat there a little longer, talking logistics, his schedule, my lawyer, no drama, just facts, just fuel. Later that evening, I returned home and pulled out the worn leather journal my father gave me the Christmas before he died. I hadn't written in it since his funeral. But that night, I picked up my pen and started again. All my life I thought keeping the peace meant staying silent. But silence let them build a war machine. I paused, then wrote, and I was standing right beside it, eyes wide open, pretending I couldn't see the fire. I turned to the back page, where Dad once scribbled a note when I was in college. "You were always the strong one, even when they didn't see it." I touched the ink with my fingertips like it could still hold warmth. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. I expected more court documents or maybe a thank you from Jude, but it was from my mother. Subject: engagement party. Just one line: "Don't come. We're trying to avoid embarrassment." I stared at the words for a long time, let them echo, let them sting. Then I smiled. That was the last time they'd ever speak to me like I was beneath them. I drove in silence, the courthouse envelope resting on the passenger seat like a coiled truth, ready to strike. My fingers flexed and relaxed against the steering wheel as the country club's gates came into view, grand, wrought iron, flanked by hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives. It was the kind of place where people wore secrets like cologne and smiled through betrayal with bleached teeth. The valet opened my door before I even cut the engine. I stepped out in black slacks and a clean-cut blouse. No glitter, no apologies, just quiet resolve, and a court order tucked inside my purse. The jazz quartet echoed from the terrace as I walked in. Chandeliers threw gold onto white linen, and the entire space had that overdone, Midwestern elegance my mother adored. Rows of champagne flutes stood untouched on silver trays. Brandy stood at the center of it all, laughing too loudly in a gown that screamed designer loan, not love. Someone at the bar did a double take when they saw me, then another. By the time I reached the edge of the room, half the family had already started whispering. My mother approached with a drink in hand and that permanently raised eyebrow. Her voice was low and clipped. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" I gave her a calm smile. "Actually, I'm just on time." She didn't get a chance to answer. A waiter passed by, and I helped myself to a glass of sparkling water. Then I headed toward the head table, where Brandy and Jude stood flanked by photographers and a suspiciously well-lit floral wall. The MC clinked his glass. "If everyone could please quiet down, we're about to begin the toast." I took a step forward. My heels didn't wobble once. "Excuse me," I said, gently but firm, cutting through the mic feedback. "I think you dropped this." I handed my mother the manila envelope. She frowned, opened it, and went sheet by sheet, her fingers stiffening with each page. "This is," she started. "A cease and desist," I finished for her, "along with preliminary filings regarding financial misrepresentation, identity misuse, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. You'll want to read carefully." The room fell into a hush so thick you could hear the condensation slide down a champagne flute. Brandy took a step forward, voice trembling. "You're ruining my moment. You always have." I looked at her without blinking. "You mean the moment based on a lie?" Before she could fire back, Jude stepped forward, took the microphone, and cleared his throat. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," he began, "but I think it's time I do." Brandy turned to him, confused. Her mother grabbed her wrist. Jude continued, "2 hours ago, I broke off this engagement. I told Brandy and her family. I just didn't want to make a scene." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Someone near the buffet dropped a fork. Brandy looked like someone had yanked her spine out. "But since there already is a scene," Jude added, scanning the crowd, "you should know this whole thing was never what it seemed." He stepped back. That was it. No fireworks, just truth. The MC tried to recover with a joke that fell flat. Brandy's knees buckled slightly. I didn't feel proud, I felt clean. I stepped away from the attention and circled the room until I found my uncle, the one who'd been managing the family trust for years, always in my mother's pocket, always just doing the paperwork. We stood off to the side, near the hallway that led to the restrooms. I didn't raise my voice. "You should check Property Title 439B in your filings," I said quietly, "and the renovation permits for the duplex on State Street." He squinted. "Why?" "Because I never signed them, but my name's there." His face went pale so fast I thought he might collapse. "Maeve, that's felony-level fraud. If your name's been forged on property assets," I held up a hand. "I know. That's why I'm telling you. Not the police, yet." He nodded slowly, like his bones had aged 10 years in 30 seconds. Back at the dessert table, Brandy was sobbing quietly into her untouched wedding cake. No one approached her, not even her friends. I walked past them without looking back. "This isn't revenge," I said almost to myself. "This is accounting." Outside, the sky was clear and crisp, stars just beginning to pierce through the suburban haze. I slid into the driver's seat and sat still for a moment. No music, no engine, just breath. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my father. Just one word. "Why?" I stared at it, my thumb hovering. Then I typed, "Because you all thought I wouldn't." The call wasn't from them. It came just after sunrise. I was sitting in the kitchen, still in the black slacks from the night before, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee when my phone rang with the kind of silence behind it you just feel in your bones. "Is this Maeve Arlston?" a calm woman's voice asked. "Your mother's been admitted to Milwaukee General. Cardiac episode. You're listed as next of kin." There was a beat where I didn't answer. I just stared out the window at the still dew on the grass, the wind barely moving the leaves on the maple tree. "Is she stable?" I finally asked. "She's conscious, but weak. We couldn't reach her other emergency contact." Of course they couldn't. Brandy was probably still holed up somewhere trying to figure out how to explain to her bridesmaids why the venue deposit had vanished. I closed my eyes and let the pause stretch before whispering, "I'll come." It took 20 minutes to get there. I drove slow, deliberately. The roads were quiet. A few joggers, a dog walker, a sanitation truck backing out of a cul-de-sac. Everything felt muted, like the world was taking a breath and waiting to see what I'd do next. The hospital smelled the same as always, disinfectant and something faintly metallic underneath. A nurse led me to the cardiac unit. The hallway lights flickered slightly overhead. As we neared the room, she stopped and handed me a sealed envelope. "She said you should have this," the nurse said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "She wrote it before she was sedated, said she might not get the words out herself." I nodded and slid the envelope into my coat pocket. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Inside the room, my mother looked like a ghost version of herself, washed out, lips dry, an oxygen tube beneath her nose. Her hair, always so carefully set in waves, was flat against the pillow. She didn't stir when I entered. I sat in the plastic chair near the window and took out the letter. The paper was hospital standard, lined, soft blue ink. "Maeve, if you're reading this, it means I've finally shut up long enough for you to get a word in. That was always your complaint, wasn't it? That we talked over you, that we decided things. The truth is, I didn't think you needed us. You were always the one who figured it out. Quiet, unshakable. Maybe that's why we punished you for it. Because we didn't understand how you kept moving forward without looking back at us. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear it from me." "Mom?" I sat with that for a while. Not forgiveness. Not even regret, really. Just an explanation tied up in old pride. It was the closest to honest I'd ever seen her be, and still, even now, it fell short of taking responsibility. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "I see," I whispered. And I did. For the first time, I saw clearly. Not just her, but all of it. A soft cough broke the silence. She was awake, eyes blinking slowly as she turned toward me. "You came," she said, voice rasping like gravel. "I did." "Did you come to say goodbye?" I stood, walked over to the foot of the bed, and looked her in the eye. "No, I came to say goodbye to the version of me who needed your approval." She blinked and for once didn't answer. I think part of her understood what I meant. Maybe that was enough. I didn't linger. On my way out, I passed the nurse's station and left the letter there. "She may want to reread it," I said. Back in the car, the sun had risen higher. It painted long shadows on the dashboard and caught the faint smudge of last night's lipstick on my collarbone. I rolled down the window. The breeze was cool but not biting. I took a deep breath and dialed the number I had memorized. "Diane? Proceed with the trust restructure and cancel the stipends, all of them, no exceptions." There was a pause on the other end. "You sure?" Diane asked gently. I stared ahead, the parking lot still empty except for a nurse lighting a cigarette beside a potted plant. "Very." The drive back was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need distraction. I needed stillness. Just enough to let it all settle. By the time I reached home, the sun had begun its descent, casting warm gold across the porch. I changed into soft jeans and an old sweater, poured a glass of iced tea, and stepped outside. The autumn air had that sharp edge that made you both nostalgic and alert. A neighbor boy sped by on a scooter, waving. "Hi, Miss Arlston," he shouted. I waved back. "Hi, Eli." He was already gone, just a blur of blue helmet and squeaky wheels. I smiled, not because anything grand had happened, but because I finally felt light enough to mean it. I sat on the porch swing, the envelope in my lap. It felt heavier than paper should. I opened the lid of the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the flame flicker to life. "You can love," I whispered, "and still let go." I fed the envelope into the flame. It caught quickly, curled in on itself, and vanished into soft ash. It didn't end in fire, but in quiet. The kind of quiet that means you're finally free.